My name is Phil Barnhart. I'm the president of the Emerald Valley Electric Vehicle Association, and I'm really pleased to welcome everybody to our meeting tonight. And I've forgotten who I'm supposed to introduce next. It's Kurt. Uh, 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 Kurt is a very active member of our steering committee has done a great job of putting together most of the program tonight. And I'm very, very happy to introduce Kurt to proceed. Kurt, you're on.
Thank you, Phil. And I do have to say, Chris Chandler really was much more involved in putting the program together than I was, but we both kind of worked on it. Welcome to our quarterly meeting. Looks like we have a nice group online. There are 7 or 8 of us here as well. What I wanted to do was just simply give you a quick view of how we hope to proceed tonight, and then can I get myself in the picture better here? Oh, well. And then turn it over to our first speaker. Our theme tonight is we want to make sure we can take care of the roads, but we also want to make sure we can take care of the climate and reduce air pollution coming from transportation. And so what we have set up for you is a 3-way presentation. Charlie Loeb from EVEVA will talk a little bit about the transportation package that passed, and particularly the road use charge that is part of that and how it's going to affect electric vehicles. We have Representative Mark Gamba, who is going to speak a little bit about a bill that he's introducing and talk also about where we are with transportation funding. And then Brett Morgan from Climate Solutions will talk a bit about his organization, the Move Oregon Forward group that we are part of and worked with at the last legislative session. We're hoping each section will be about 10 minutes or so. We're glad to have questions. Our hope is this is not just presentations, but discussion as well. So first, I would introduce Charlie, who is going to talk to us about the transportation bill and in particular the road usage charge. Charlie?
Sure. Thanks, Kurt. And I should say I was involved as a citizen working on the bill. I'm not the expert that someone like Representative Gamba is or Brett Morgan is about the bill. So I'm giving a very cursory overview of the bill, mostly how it relates to road usage charges, how it will affect people like our members. And I'm happy for any corrections or clarifications from those who are more expert than I am. But we wanted to make sure we started at just kind of a basic idea of, what are we really talking about here that's coming toward EV owners. I wanted to start by just talking about, what happened to my... That's going to be interesting.
Your screen is up, Charlie. It's up.
I know, but I lost my ability to change what it's showing. So, there we go. Where are we in terms of EV adoption in Oregon? This will provide a little context. And this is the Oregon Electric Vehicle Dashboard. For those who haven't ever checked it out before, this is available on ODOT's website anytime you want to look at it. It's usually a few months behind in terms of data. But you can see that by the end of August, we had almost 90,000 battery electric vehicles in the state, about 36.5 plug-in hybrid vehicles, both of which are counted as zero-emission vehicles by the state of Oregon, for a total of 126,375. This is a good status update on where we are. You can see Lane County listed separately for those of us who are in Lane County. Some of the other, you can also go county by county. I know we have people from Lynn and other places here as well, and out in Lincoln. You can look at what any county, how any county is doing in terms of EV adoption. But the most striking thing about this to me is that there's 126,375 zero-emission vehicles registered in the state of Oregon. The state legislature set a goal back in 2019 to have 250,000 registered EVs by the end of 2025. And we're almost there, but we're in terms of the date, but only slightly over halfway there in terms of actually reaching the goal. So that's important as we talk about the rest of the information about road usage charges. So let me tell you just, again, I'm just going to give you a thumbnail of how the road usage charge is expected to work in the state. After the legislature was unable to pass HB 2025, the big transportation package, they did pass HB 3991, which I'm describing here as a stopgap transportation bill, a way to raise a little bit of extra money to prevent massive layoffs at the Department of Transportation and other ill outcomes. That bill, which Governor Kotek recently signed, raised the gas tax 6 cents from 40 cents to 46 cents. But it did keep the idea from HB 2025 of requiring a mandatory road usage charge for electric and hybrid vehicles in lieu of a gas tax. I think that we aren't surprised that folks were looking for a way for electric vehicles to pay their share of road maintenance, although we were already doing that by paying higher registration fees. However, adding in electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles was something new that came out of this past legislative session. In addition to imposing the road usage charge on conventional hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and electric vehicles, it set that per mile road usage charge to 5% of the per gallon gas tax rate. So at 46 cents per gallon for the gas tax, it comes out to 2.3 cents per mile that electric and hybrid vehicle owners would pay for the privilege of using the road. It phases in the requirement. If you already own an electric vehicle, you'll start paying the road usage charge July 1st of 2027. If you buy a new electric vehicle, you'll start paying January 1st of 2028. And then plug-in hybrid and conventional hybrid vehicles will start paying July 1st of 2028. You pay per mile. Now I'll talk a little bit about the logistics of that in a second. However, you can opt just to pay $340 and not worry about it. Turns out if you drive 15,000 miles a year, probably come out a little ahead paying the $340. But if you drive less than $15,000 a year, 15,000 miles a year, you would pay less with the road usage charge. In addition, those extra registration fees we've all been paying, those will go away once you start paying the road usage charge. So there is a little bit of relief there. Logistics of the program, Oregon's been experimenting with a model for about 10 years called Origo, which was a voluntary opportunity to sign up. Instead of paying the extra registration fees for electric or high efficiency vehicles, you could pay by the mile. And so Oregon's been sort of test piloting this program for a bit, and I believe the plan is for the mandatory road usage charge just to flow into that system. And in fact, if you go to the Origo website now, listed in the bottom here, you can see they're already making mention of the fact that this is going to be mandatory coming up in 2026 or 2027. Basically, you enroll in the program and you choose a private third-party vendor that's going to collect your information and provide you a bill on a monthly or quarterly basis for the number of miles you drive. If you're driving a plug-in hybrid or hybrid, the vendor will automatically credit the fuel taxes you pay. They'll do this based on a model, not on the actual fuel taxes you may have paid. And then you choose one of 3 reporting methods for how you report your miles. You can commit to sending a picture of your odometer, and they will go off the pictures you provide to show how much you have driven over the course of the preceding month or quarter. They can tap your vehicle telematics if you give them permission. A lot of modern cars of all types collect extensive information about your car, including how much you're driving it. And can make that available over the air. You can authorize someone other than the manufacturer or dealer to get that information, including one of these third-party vendors. Or finally, the vendor can give you a dongle that'll plug into your diagnostics port, and that will collect information and send to them. That one does have the advantage of those are GPS-enabled devices. So if you leave Oregon, you're only responsible for paying the road usage charge on Oregon roads. So if you leave Oregon, the GPS will know you left Oregon and they'll stop. They won't bill you for those miles. Otherwise, you have to figure out, there has to be a way to figure out how to claim that back if you really want to. Particularly important for people who drive a lot of miles out of state and don't want to pay road usage charge for the in-state miles. Now, of course, all these different ways have different levels of privacy intrusion. You know, the vendor at least is collecting this information. It's anonymized to go to the state, but I think, you know, we've all learned somewhat to distrust the security of those systems. And of course, a law enforcement authority could access, you know, with a proper warrant, could access that data, which if you trust your law enforcement authorities isn't a problem, but it is local, state, and federal. So some people could find themselves not perhaps trusting and would rather not have their GPS location information shared with anyone who can get access. So there are some privacy concerns. Some examples and comparisons of how the road usage charge compares to a gas tax. Here's one, Ford F-150. You can, of course, get a gas-powered version of that, or you can get the Lightning electric-powered. Average Oregonian drives 12,000 miles a year. If you do the math on that, you can see that the total taxes you would pay with the new gas tax rate or the road usage rate, it would come out identical, $276 each. This is like what I think the legislature had in mind in terms of making it fair for electric vehicle owners and non-electric vehicle owners to pay the same amount. Unfortunately, the road usage charge doesn't always work out that way. Here's an example comparing the two Chevrolet Blazers, the gas-powered and the electric version. Now, the Chevrolet Blazer, the gas-powered version, actually gets a 26 mile per gallon combined city highway. If you do the math on this, you find that the gas-powered Blazer, which is burning 462 gallons a year based on 12,000 miles, is only going to pay $212 in gas taxes, while the EV is going to pay $276. Now, it's not a lot different, but it's like, it doesn't seem a little backward. The cleaner car is costing more to drive. There are some differences in registration fees, which alter this analysis a bit. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. But then check this out. Here we have the Toyota Prius. Now, of course, those conventional hybrids, including the standard old Prius, plug-in hybrid vehicles like the Prius Prime, are also going to be subject to the road usage charge. So for 12,000 miles a year, they're going to pay that same $276 that all the other electric vehicles do. Compare it to a Toyota Corolla hatchback, just a plain old Corolla hatchback, getting 35 miles per gallon. That's only going to pay $158 a year. Now, where's the justice in that for those of us who believe that, you know, the state has an interest in clean air, in avoiding health problems associated with dirty air, and reducing climate change pollution, and spending money that we're spending on fuel in state as opposed to somewhere importing fuel from somewhere else. I mean, there are a lot of advantages to electric vehicles for Oregon, but here we're setting it up so that it's a better deal to drive a gas-powered car. And that Corolla hatchback will pay $158 in gas taxes compared to the F-150 Lightning paying $276, to the Chevrolet Blazer EV paying $276. It's somewhere the math seems off. Key takeaways from my part of this presentation: barring changes by the legislature, be prepared to pay the road usage charge in 2027. I think like everyone on this call is probably an EV owner. That's coming your way. There are these data reporting trade-offs between data privacy and convenience. The road usage charge is structured to disfavor the drivers of electric and hybrid vehicles. Doesn't take into account other benefits that driving electric brings to the state of Oregon. The great irony, I think, is it doesn't really even address the major source of gas tax stagnation. You know, I mean, the reason we need a road usage charge is because the state's not getting enough transportation dollars, right? So we're trying to figure out a way to pay more. There are, if that Toyota Corolla that gets 35 miles per gallon, if you bought a Toyota Corolla in 1990, it would have gotten 26 miles per gallon. A lot of the reason we've stagnated in collection of gas taxes has to do with just gas-powered cars getting more efficient. That vaporized 25% of gas tax revenue right there, just in the gas-powered car realm. You saw the figure I put up at the beginning, 125,000 EVs, zero emission vehicles registered in the state. There are almost 4 million total vehicles registered in this state. The EVs and plug-in hybrids are a drop in the bucket, and hitting them with a road usage charge isn't going to do anything to deal with the state's budget issue. It's much bigger than that. And while I think that EVVA has taken the position that we need to modernize transportation funding for the state for sure, you know, higher efficiency and more electric vehicles are coming and they're going to be ever more important. We need to accomplish that in a way that's going to promote the kind of clean, non-polluting transportation we want and not actually end up just throwing another subsidy at gas-powered vehicles, which already get plenty. So anyway, that's my part of the presentation. I'm going to stop here and turn it over to Chris to introduce our next speakers.
Hi, you actually don't need to see me. We can see Representative Gamba there. Hello, Representative Gamba. He was an editorial photographer and he was sent around the world to capture images of exciting adventures and beautiful locations. Decades ago, we saw undeniable signs of increasing drought, bleaching reefs, melting glaciers, significant weather disturbances, and other indicators of climate change around the globe. In spite of very clear warnings from the scientific community, Gamba saw governments and businesses were doing virtually nothing to address the impending threat. Climate change was the core reason Mark Gamba first ran for Milwaukee City Council, and climate change remains his top motivator today. During his 8 years as Milwaukee's mayor, he championed causes ranging from urban tree canopy protections to advancing racial justice in the city bureaucracy to building out bike and pedestrian infrastructure and more. Representative Mark Gamba is one of just a few Oregon legislators to live in rented houses, and he is of modest means. These perspectives inform his policy positions as he strives to keep poor and working class families centered in his lawmaking. He serves on multiple interim committees, including transportation and transportation oversight, climate, energy and environment, housing and homelessness, and he is the chair of the Oregon Environmental Caucus. Representative Gamba?
Thank you so much. That was very kind. And I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I always prefer to do these kinds of things in person. And thank you, Charlie, for the great outline and the pretty deep dive, actually, I would say, on the situation. And I would say that as I was beginning to prepare my two bills for this session, where I started on this topic was that you're right. We need to make the system that we're creating, the RUC, more fair for EVs and hybrids. And the more I thought about it and dug into it and started to work on it, the more I kept getting hit in the face with this reality. The current gas tax is underfunded. It's not indexed to reality. And we hope to replace it soon across the board with the RUC. So why am I working so hard to try and fix something so that it ties efficiently to the broken system that we're trying to get rid of? And so I backed away from that concept. And the initial response from my fellow EV drivers is generally not happiness. But I want to talk you guys through some stuff. There's some background you need to understand to get into this. And I'm first going to touch on something that feels really wildly abroad from it, which is Oregon's revenue system, because I think it's important to have sort of the background of the entire system in your head as you're thinking about this stuff. So Oregon has the most broken revenue system of any state in the nation. Most states have the three-legged stool. They have income tax, sales tax, and property tax. In our infinite wisdom, we've chosen not to have a sales tax. Then in the early 90s, we basically cut the property tax system off at the knees. We passed Measure 5 and 50, which artificially limits property taxes from increasing by more than 3%, and then only on years where property values increase by more than 3%. And because all of that wasn't bad enough, we passed a thing called the kicker. And what the kicker says is 2 years in advance of a given budget, the state's economist is meant to guess what our income is going to be. And if his guess is off by more than 2%, everything above that number kicks. So, as an example, 2 years ago, or the second to last one, we kicked $5.6 billion. And that very same year, we bonded $1 billion to pay for our portion of the interstate bridge, which means over time we'll spend $1.5 billion. So that's the state's general revenue situation. Now, transportation doesn't really care about that in a way, because most of our transportation funding is supposed to come from the Highway Trust Fund, which is predominantly funded by gas taxes and weight mile taxes. So the weight mile taxes are how the heavies, the big trucks, how they pay into the system, and then we pay in with the gas tax. The gas tax has never been indexed. So there's a lot of people that say the reason we don't have enough money in the Highway Trust Fund is because of EVs and hybrids. That's a tiny percentage. Charlie was closer in saying that it's actually energy efficiency or fuel efficiency that's caused a bigger portion. But the actual biggest portion of why we are so far underfunding our transportation system is inflation. Inflation has been going up. We all know this. We all experience it in our day-to-day lives. Something you may not know is inflation in the construction industry, whether you're constructing homes or roads or bridges, has been going up about 15% year over year since about 2010-ish. And that's why when you see, oh, we didn't build the interstate bridge and now it's 5 years later and it's all of a sudden billions more dollars. Well, guess why? 15% year over year compounds really, really rapidly. That's a lot of money. So I'm going to take you back to 2017, which was the last time we did a big transportation package. And at that time, they did all the math, they looked at all the numbers, and they said, okay, to keep our system functional, to replace bridges on a sane cycle, no bridge is designed to last more than about 100 years. So bridges have to be replaced roughly every 100 years to pave our roads on a cycle that will make it the least expensive for us. Because if you allow a road to completely degrade, the cost to rebuild is much, much more expensive than putting a 2-inch lift on that road every so often. So we knew back in 2017 that we needed to raise the gas tax at that time by 70 cents. 70 cents. That was the math in the room of here's what we need in order to keep our transportation system functioning. Of course, the legislature did not do that. They raised it a dime. And on top of that, they said, oh, by the way, ODOT, here's a whole bunch of projects we want you to do, right? Highway 217, the Rose Quarter, 205, blah, blah, blah. All very, very expensive projects. and all they gave them in addition to what we were already getting was a dime. So we didn't get our system back up to where we were funding it properly, and we actually stole from that because we gave them a bunch of projects to do. So that's the background. That's the place where we're at right now. So here's me thinking about, okay, I am in the process of messing with this system that we hope to be the way we fund our transportation system going forward. Do I want to make it fairer for hybrids and EVs for the next 4 or 5 years, and then have to have a big fight when we switch everybody into it to dramatically increase what we are paying into it? At the same time, I'm trying to convince, the folks who don't want the government to know where they are to be part of the RUC system. That doesn't make sense to me. So the bill that we're offering this year is simply this. It's to set up an empirical system that we can all agree to. We can all decide, yes, we want our interstates maintained at this particular pavement index. And we want our non-interstate highways maintained at this particular pavement index. And we want our arterials maintained and our collectors and our neighborhood streets. So cities, counties, and the state. Because remember, the gas tax, half of it goes to cities and counties. And the other half stays with ODOT. So what have we all decided we want to maintain our system at? Do we want to replace our bridges every 100 years or 120 years, something sane? Right now, what we're on target to do is replace bridges about every 900 years. That's what our current funding mechanism has us set up for. Every 900 years, we will replace a bridge that was designed to last 100 years. I think you can imagine the problem there. So let's establish the metrics that we want as adults, looking at a system that was very expensive to build and it's very expensive to maintain. What are the metrics that we want that system maintained at? Okay, that's one data set. And what would it cost to do that year over year over year? The second metric is how many miles did Oregonians drive in the most recent data set, which I think typically the most recent data set is like a year old or 18 months old, I forget. And then it's a simple math problem of dividing one into the other, and you know what we should be paying per mile to operate vehicles in the state of Oregon. Light vehicles. Let's forget the heavies for the time being. And then the idea is to come back in 27 and have a conversation. All right, now we have real data based on our intentions, our goals for maintaining our system. Do we want to establish that as the mechanism by which we make the RUC charge people? Or not? We can choose not. We can choose something significantly less, and then our grandchildren will, have to swim across rivers. But I want us to have that adult conversation in 27 before we establish what the RUC will be. And then in 28, we can come back and create a new schedule that says, okay, after the plug-in hybrids, which is the third thing that's currently scheduled, when do we want to bring, say, delivery vehicles in? When do we want to bring all ICE vehicles in? What's the schedule we want to do? So you can well imagine, given the information I've just given you, that the number that we're going to get back from ODOT is significantly higher than what we're even talking about today in the current mechanism. So that means that those of us, and I'm part of the us that drives EVs and rides an electric bike for that matter, those of us driving the more efficient vehicles will pay more for a handful of years, significantly more, on a per mile basis for a handful of years for our taxes. Now, You all know this, but it bears bringing it to mind when we're thinking about this. We all know that we're spending about a quarter of what we used to spend fueling our vehicles. Is that right? Is that everybody else's experience? That's my experience. I'm spending about a quarter of what I used to spend to fuel my Prius. Okay. And maintenance, I've put a set of tires on my car and I think some windshield wipers one time. That's it for the maintenance I've spent. So we, as a class, are spending a lot less across the board to operate our vehicles than people driving ICE vehicles. So even if we are, for a handful of years, spending more in taxes to maintain our system, we're still spending a hell of a lot less than everybody else is spending. I just want that to be sort of top of mind as we start this discussion. I'll leave it at that, and we can move into a discussion and conversation if you want, or we can let Brett present and yeah, whoever, Peter, your hand.
Chris?
So I think we were going to do the speakers first, right, Chris, and then have discussion?
So which
Yeah,
one?
you're on mute, Chris, yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you. Okay, great. I will introduce Brett Morgan, and then we can get into our spirited dialogue. Brett Morgan is Climate Solutions Transportation Policy Director in Oregon, and he collaborates with state and local governments, advocacy groups, and private sector partners to align funding, policy, and planning in transportation to enact strong climate action through electrification, expanding multimodal options, and land use in transportation. Before joining Climate Solutions, Brett worked at Thousand Friends of Oregon, where he focused on protecting and enhancing Oregon's unique land use system by collaborating with governments and grassroots organizations to protect farms and forest land in Oregon through advocacy and lobbying. Prior to Thousand Friends, Brett worked as a legislative aide to Representative Susan McLean and as a campaign manager on state legislative races. Brett recently earned his master's in public policy from Portland State University with a graduate certificate in emergency management and community resilience. He also holds a BS with dual majors in economics and environmental sciences. Brett's passion for the environment extends beyond his professional life. He finds joy in snowboarding and splitboarding and actively participates in citizen science through avalanche and glacial observations. He loves anything that lets him enjoy the beauty of the Pacific Northwest in the outdoors, including helping relatives with farming in the Willamette Valley. Brett?
You always want your bio to be shorter after someone reads it, I think is my conclusion. I'm like, oh my gosh, enough about me. Thank you, though. That's very, very kind. And thank you for inviting me to your meeting. And I've gotten to work with a lot of you in EVEVA. I don't know if you refer to it as in shorthand that way or the full acronym, but over the last legislative session as your membership and Move Oregon Forward, but also definitely have some super volunteers, I would call them, in your ranks. Chris showing up to press conferences and rallying, and then Charlie just kind of also being a curious number sleuth and providing me a lot of important analysis throughout the legislative session. Hold on. Got a puppy dog in the house, and she's excited everyone's back home. And worked with you all in the long legislative session, which is kind of its own saga to itself. And maybe not not something Representative Gamba and I want to relive per se. But I don't have any. I've been just writing down some notes as we've been talking here, and I just want to appreciate everything Representative Gamba said as well. I'll just back up a little bit and say I've been at Climate Solutions about a year and a half, and I was newer to the electrification world coming from Thousand Friends, which focuses on land use and protections and rural-urban balance in planning in Oregon's protecting Oregon's unique land use system. So it was definitely a bit of a jump start into my electrification world. through this work. And in particular, as some of you all were closer to in the last year, there was quite the stir up on the Advanced Clean Truck Program, which was a regulatory tool Oregon adopted under the Clean Air Act that was under, as I would characterize it, industry and misinformation attacks at the state level. Oregon was one of a dozen states that adopted this policy and were facing these attacks. So I had to learn really quickly about a bunch of these topics. But um, I think one of the things we engage with throughout the long session as Move Oregon Forward, and as you all may or may not know, Move Oregon Forward is a statewide coalition of about 50 different partners, place-based groups. Climate Solutions is a part of it. EVEVA, Oregon Environmental Council, OLCV, safety partners, transit partners, kind of anyone you can think of in the more progressive space that wanted to see a comprehensive transportation package. And we worked a lot with folks like Representative Gamba, not just on issues like the RUC, but really complicated, really hard conversations around revenue generally. Um, and that space will continue to be really important to plug into in the next year. But kind of, sorry, meandering back towards the RUC, I think Rep. Gamba's summation on the current issues are incredibly timely, given the referral that's underway currently of the limited stopgap bill that was passed in that short legislation. I would say special session. It was kind of a short session because it was a month long for logistical vote reasons, which is a whole, again, other saga to itself. But um, now with the imminent referral of this. Mainly the revenue tools. So they're in the process of collecting signatures, those that want to refer the gas tax increase and registration fee increases to the ballot. It appears they have the necessary signatures to do so. It's 75,000. They claim to have 150,000 plus. This will ensue a large fight, what would be November, although I've heard conversation there may be a desire to move that up to the May election to separate it out for a variety of reasons from the main election in the midterms, but that's kind of neither here nor there. What is not included in that referral is this road usage charge, though, as well as some of the revisions to the weight mile tax system for the heaviest duty trucks on the road, which also kind of applies to the electric trucks as well, which is totally, again, outside of this discussion. So things are really bleak for all the reasons Representative Gamba shared, and because now this thing that is set to preserve in my last conversation with the labor partners, particularly SEIU, what they're looking at if this gas tax referral is successful and the gas taxes or the 6 cent increases pulled back, it looks like about 1,000 job positions cut from ODOT, 400 of which are active, like currently filled, and 600 of which I think were to be filled. There might be some fuzziness in the math. And this will happen um, right as winter plowing occurs. So if the referral is successful, they cannot collect taxes until the vote occurs, which is another reason to compact the timeline down because you're stuck in this limbo of not being able to collect revenues or expend them on anything as well. So ODOT has already indicated that there will be likely impacts to its plowing services on our mountain passes. We would need more snow for that to actually be a problem, which is again a different issue that concerns me greatly. Um, um, so not a good picture looking in the more short term budgetarily. One thing I'd also add that Representative Gambit did not say is we pay among the lowest in total taxation per house or per capita for transportation. I think we're among the Western states like ninth or 10th, and the stopgap moved us like up one spot, if that. Behind Montana, behind Idaho. What is it, Representative Gamba?
We were last.
Yeah.
This if this gas tax sticks, we will be second to last, with Montana just slightly below us.
Yeah, thank you. That always, I think, blows people's brains a little bit.
And and
Um,
and to be let's make up a little more point on that. We're not talking about a few percentage points. California, I think, spends 4 times what we spend
per capita, yeah.
per capita. Washington 3 times. Even Idaho and Utah are paying double what we pay. So we're talking about a lot of difference, not.
Not like we're just hanging out by each other. Totally. I appreciate that. Yeah, so I think all that being said, that's sort of some of the context Representative Gamba is carrying this. The other thing that Representative Gamba didn't say is yeah, the legislature is facing for the first time in maybe a decade, if not more, a cuts budget scenario where, because of the big, beautiful, ugly bill and a variety of other factors, education, healthcare, um, a lot of other essential government services beyond just transportation are gravely impacted, and they're not going to have sufficient resources to cover all of this. And so there will be hard decisions. And ODOT has been in its own budgetary woes for a while, but they're already requiring of all the state agencies to do 5% reduction exercises for their current programs, which is really tough. And I'm sure former Representative Barnhart could tell you all about what it was like to go through cuts. It's real painful. That being said, Climate Solutions, who I work for, is still in conversation around the ruck issue, and I respect the points that Representative Gamba made. Um, I think there's kind of a variety of ways you could look at it. I think I continue from a fairness perspective, just want to reemphasize that we are overpaying proportional to other user groups, and there are some ways that this is going to not play out so successfully, particularly the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle issue. Currently, there's a double taxation issue, so they will collect a gas tax but have no way to prove. Um, Miles driven gas versus miles driven electric. And so you'll be charged for both your road usage miles and your potential gas tax. And while there is claims to be a differential rate, so you might pay a lower rate overall, the data shows that the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle users in particular have a lot of variability in terms of total driving electric versus total driving gas, which creates some complications, I think, for that math to be effective. Um, I mean, at the risk of maybe having some policy crosstalk in real time, I think we need to Oregon has a weirdly complicated system for, uh, it's called the Highway Cost Allocation System, HCAS, and it requires modal balance between trucks and light duty vehicles. The math is a black box that is hard to explain for a variety of users, but the even more complicated thing is that HCAS doesn't particularly look at what Representative Gamba's concept is really calling for, which would what the name would sound like. It has to do more with how you actually expend money towards various user groups and the balance then between these user groups and kind of also the wear on the road. But point being, while I appreciate Representative Gamba's concept, if it only applies to light duty vehicles, my math starts to differentiate these things a little bit. And so I have spent some time trying to think very carefully about how you might think about these ruck rates differently depending on user groups. And the missing piece of the pie right now is that we don't have a medium duty ruck. Um, and this all presumes that we end up with everyone on the ruck, for example. But um, taken with a big ass grain of salt, if I can be so French with it. Let's just expand this. If you take the total amount of cost in the system, why did my page jump around so much? I was on 5, I think. If you look at the total amount of cost in the system, right now, the light duty ruck rate is actually kind of close to how you might assign total wear on the roads proportional to the groups. Because remember, oh, I haven't said this yet, but light duty comparative to medium duty comparative to heavy duty, it's a factor of 4 as it increases weight over the number of wheels. And so, for example, the stat I like to use a 4,000 pound passenger vehicle compared to a 40,000 18-wheeler on the road. That 18-wheeler does 250,000 times more damage to the road than that light duty vehicle. So I'll share some of this more and this is all very fast noodling in AI, so there's should be some fast and looseness to that comment. But I agree that we need to make sure that this light duty ruck rate is proportional to the actual cost on the system. Um, but I also think that if you don't consider the medium duty and the heavy duty impacts proportional, it gets complicated. And HCAS again has like a lot of bearing on how these rates between these different user groups are set up, which is not what we're here to talk about today. But I think why this matters is so this is just a ruck calculator that I've tried to build, and my math is not 100% accurate because Charlie's is 100% accurate. But it gives you some rough bearings on a variety of things. Um, Right now, you can change the ruck rate in here, but for example, sorry y'all, it's probably a little small for you. Let me see what I can do about that. Yeah, I can change the ruck rate. So I'm talking about, let's just say the 9,000 miles that we currently assume that's the ODOT standard, which is not the right one. At the current rate at 0.23 cents, this just kind of shows you what different user groups would pay compared to each other. Again, this will deviate from Charlie's math a little bit, but you kind of clearly see what's happening here. But as you increase the miles driven, the AAA estimates the average driver in Oregon is about 12,000 miles. I think there's good math to say it's probably between 12 and 14,000, depending on where you live. You start to have some real barriers. For example, so under the current RUC system, you can pay a flat $340 per year instead of having a per mile fee. And that's kind of built around the assumptions of the average driving. But once you are at 12,000 miles and at the current RUC rate of about 20 mpg equivalency, the average user starts to exceed a cost of about $340 per year. So you would probably just want to opt into paying the flat rate. But if you're a rural user, this becomes to become more accentuated. So if you're assuming 15,000 miles a year, 20,000 miles a year would not be out of their question for that. The disparity grows more starkly and it becomes closer to about $100 between a 30 mpg car, which is probably closer to what the fleet average is in Oregon for light duty, and getting close to 150, 175 here for comparing it to a 40 mpg car. And this left-hand bar just kind of shows what your lifetime exposure is. So if you assume a car lives about 15 years on average, that disparity is about $1,000. And again, these are all small numbers. But once you kind of change the ruck rate to be closer to a 30 mpg vehicle, you just kind of have a much more efficient parity across the user groups. And again, this all needs to get fine-tuned a little bit. This is something I built really quickly, but haven't had time to spend with. But um, you end up with a lot more modal clarity. So you're still paying more than the 40 mpg car, right? Because we're indexing it at roughly about a 30, but you end up paying less per mile now because of how some of the registration fees and some of the other components work than that gas car. There is a revenue hit to that, and my back and napkin has said that that's anywhere between 10 to 15 million dollars a year in the first year and would likely go up year to year because of that. Um,
Hey, Brett, I think we
yeah.
have a bunch of questions for Q&A. So
Oh
I hate to
gosh.
break
Okay.
in. I hate
I
to
can
break in.
stop anytime. So let me just sorry, I got way lost there, but let me just give you a couple other things you should know before I stop talking. Short session is coming up. There will be some legislation that's of value that will flag through Move Oregon Forward. Watch for emails regarding that. There's two other things happening in the background right now. There's ongoing rulemaking regarding the Oregon Clean Vehicle Rebate Program and medium heavy duty incentive programs. Right now it's limited to RUC membership, but there will be rules posted at some point with a public comment period. Generally speaking, I think the convergence of the rulemaking is to give DEQ a little more directionality to focus on some of the income qualified programs versus the non-income qualified programs for electric vehicle allocations, which I think, given the limited resources we have as a state, is probably the prudent thing to do for now. Um, Secondly, there will be some rulemaking date uncertain, either probably before short session, so January in a very accelerated way, or probably sometime in March in a less accelerated way, but related to Governor Kotek's executive order on clean energy, a component that has to do with clean fuels. Clean fuels reduces the amount of carbon in gas-powered vehicles, but has an interlinkage back to electric vehicles. They kind of assume a carbon emission rate based on the how much carbon is coming from the grid supply that you're getting. And the executive order also explicitly calls for ratcheting down that amount of carbon in the fuels, but then utilizing that clean fuels program to incentivize electric vehicle programs. That's a little vague right now, and how that will get interpreted into more specific policies, particularly how you use clean fuels dollars, which already do support programs. For electrification, how that will kind of change in time. So that's that. Sorry, I was a little meandering all over the place, and I'm happy to answer questions about what I said or afterwards via email. Um, and I will stop talking. I'm sorry I went on for so long.
Thank you. Thank you. First question for our panelists. Peter.
Yeah, thanks. Well, great presentations. A couple of things, Representative Gamba, super important, useful information. I think we're still taking out a little higher costs, especially in the use phase for purchase, and obviously taking on some other challenges and costs to enable EVs. I'm also not sure that we can afford to keep expanding existing system with these monster projects rather than keep an eye on what that means for future maintenance costs. Right? I think that would probably get some ODOT funding closer to manageable. I'm all for fairness. Charlie touched on this. I'm not for call it one-sided fairness, right? We're all saying, all right, it's fine for us to cover our share of the road usage. At the same time, then I want to see that applied beyond just the road costs. Right? The main reason we're driving, well, for many of us, the main reason we're driving EVs is climate change, but it's also having positive impact on national security and healthcare. So who is looking at baking the fair contributions towards healthcare and climate change mitigation costs into the gas tax? If we're talking fair share, it seems to only come in one direction. Right? We're doing the right, well, most of us believe we're doing the right thing for climate change with some side benefits for healthcare, which isn't minimal, right? You look at the number of deaths alone caused by fossil fuel pollution. How do we get that into the gas tax?
I'm going to say, I think we got it. Let's give Representative Gamba or others a chance to respond. I kind of made a similar point in my presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% get you, and I agree. I guess I would reverse the question and say, let's just create a fantasy world where we say, okay, because you're driving an efficient vehicle that's not polluting as bad or at all, and therefore is not, destroying the climate further, you shouldn't have to pay any taxes. So now you just saved, what's the flat fee, Brett? Three and a quarter, 320,
340.
340. Let's use that as our number just because it's an easy thing to talk about. So you've just saved, those people $340 a year on top of the several $1,000s a year they're going to save on their maintenance and on their fueling. Do you think that number is going to be a thing that causes, that by itself is going to be the thing that causes a whole bunch of people to move into EVs instead of ICE vehicles?
I think it'll slow down adoption. Right, we're seeing an additional $300 starting January dumped on EV purchasers. Now, they're not going to pay that every 2 years, but the initial purchase costs will go up. The fees for registration and titling will go up by on the order of $300, and they're already higher. Right?
Well, ours will no longer be higher. Ours will no longer be higher once the RUC kicks in. So let's compare apples to apples.
Yeah,
Fine.
The RUC kicks in.
that you get is $95. Yeah.
Once
I'm
the
not-
RUC kicks in, we all pay the same vehicle registration rate.
And that was good information. I'm not saying let's not pay our fair share. I'm saying let other drivers pay the fair share for the costs they're causing that aren't just tied to road usage, right? I'm happy to contribute to the roads I'm driving on. I think the overall budget, there are some questions, but what about the costs that burning fossil fuels are driving up?
I 100% hear you. I get that.
I'm not saying I want to pay less. I'm saying
I hear what you're saying. I totally hear what you're saying. What I'm asking you is, do you think it will make a difference in adoption? A significant difference in adoption?
If I could jump in and just say, I think that it's, there's a whole lot of bad news coming at EVs right now. We haven't reached cost parity in terms of conventional or ICE vehicles and EVs in terms of upfront purchase cost. There's stories out in the news about EV maintenance costs being high, and I know a lot of individuals don't have that, but some do. When the cars don't work. But the media picks up on the worst case. We have if you can charge at home, yes, your fuel costs are a heck of a lot lower, as you've said. But if you're charging at public DC fast chargers, your fuel costs really aren't all that much lower. And then we get the news that, oh yeah, now you're going to have to pay more than the gas-powered vehicles from the state too. It's just a combination of things, and it feels like the state's piling on, as opposed to creating a message or environment that we want people to switch to EVs, which I think Oregon absolutely has an interest in, and Oregon stated as much in its policy documents. So how do we I do want to get to some other people's questions, but how do we turn this around so that the messaging is, you're going to benefit, and everyone's going to benefit by switching to EV, and you're going to benefit financially as well as other ways. Because right now, we're sending all the messages are the wrong message.
Yeah, for sure. It's bad timing. No question. I would posit that the thing that's going to be a bigger boon to EV adoption is starting to get EV charging in multifamily residential. That, in my mind, is right now the biggest barrier to EV adoption, is that half the population can't charge at home.
That's a big one. Mike Brixius is here, and he had indicated he had a question.
Sure.
I do have a couple questions, but I want to make a quick comment on what we were just talking about. The wife and I had a discussion in the 90s, and given the proliferation at the time of climate deniers, we just decided that we had to do more than our fair share, because we had to do for ourselves, plus make up for the, we call them Neanderthals, sorry. But my questions are, one, I've always wondered, I've driven electric since 2013, 100% electric since in our entire family since 2018. I'm very aware that this vehicle I drive is a four-door sedan with a heck of a lot of torque, and it weighs 4,000 pounds. So I'm curious if there's any actual empirical data on how much more damage or how much more wear that actually does to the road.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that's brought up very often by the proponents of EVs should pay more in their argument for why they should pay more. And it's a BS argument. And I think you're being unfair to Neanderthals, frankly, when you call it.
I'm sorry.
But the reality is, and any road engineer will tell you this, until you reach the weight of approximately what a school bus full of kids weighs, you're not having any more effect on the road, whether you're driving an old four-banger VW Bug, which, as I recall, was one of the lightest vehicles out there for a long time, or a Hummer. It's irrelevant because the weight starts to kick in, starts to matter when you get to that school bus weight. So that's an important piece, but it is an argument I constantly have to make and constantly have to defend in these conversations.
Okay, well, thank you. That's something I've wondered a long time. Now, something I never wondered about until you just spoke is, are we going to need a New Deal to replace all the bridges that were built in the 1930s?
We're going to need something unless we decide to, spend closer to what the other states surrounding us are paying into their system. When Utah and Idaho are paying twice what we're paying, that we're not paying enough, because those are two states that are not into paying taxes. And to be clear, just so that you know, and part of the reason I started this talk off with my little talk about our revenue system, about half of the money that goes into most states' transportation systems is sales tax.
Close it here soon.
Half. And we don't have that.
One or two more?
We don't have a sales tax. Now, somebody brought this up, so I want to touch on it. At the end of session, when the bill that we had that we came within one vote of passing was ready to go, we had something in there called a privilege charge, privilege fee, whatever the heck it was. It's really a sales tax. And it was 2% on new vehicles, 1% on used vehicles with a value of more than $10,000. That alone would have raised enough money to put $250 million per biennium into the big projects or the debt service for those big projects, and $250 million a year into what we call great streets, which is taking dangerous highways that run through cities and making them safe for bikes and pedestrians. It's a really powerful mechanism. And then it also was giving us $50 million per biennium for safe routes to school. So it was a really, really powerful taxation method, and you would be surprised how little pushback there was on that piece. That piece was not utterly hated. So that, in my mind, is if we could bifurcate our system and say, okay, we've just figured out what it costs to maintain our system so that we are replacing our bridges every 100 years, so that we are paving them and repairing them as they should be repaired. That's the RUC. Everybody's in the RUC. That will pay for it. It will be indexed to reality. The legislature will never, ever again have to grow enough of a spine to raise a gas tax. It will just be indexed. The new shiny things, i.e. new big interstate projects, great streets projects, safe routes projects, all of that would come out of the vehicle sales tax. So if we were to do that, if we could set that up as our mechanism going forward, then we never have to worry about our system being underfunded again for maintenance and preservation. And every time we want to build a new project, we can say, okay, are we willing to pay a higher sales tax on vehicles? It's that simple. But that decision then doesn't ever affect our maintenance, which right now it does, because money tends to slide inside of that pot of money from the gas tax into the big projects. And we're carrying a huge amount of debt service right now.
It looks like Brett had something to kick in on this too.
Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce some of what Rep Gamble was saying there around the privilege tax that kind of scaled, which was inherently a pretty progressive tool given it excluded a lot of vehicles. I've maybe bought one car in my life that would be hit by that 1%. Um, but even better than that, is that we also tried to bring forth in that it did not get adopted by any measure, but try in that long session a luxury vehicle tax that would have taxed vehicles above, I think we said 75,000 at a rate that was much lower than any peer state around us. So if you were to go to any other state, you would have to pay 5, 6, 7%, depending on your state, on the purchase of that vehicle. Only a very select few buy vehicles of that, and those that are doing are often financing too, so it's kind of a loss in the mix. But I raise that because there's a lot of complicating factors in transportation. We have a color of money problem. Everything Representative Gamba just described is in the Highway Trust Fund. So we have a very limited purview gas taxes, things that are taxing the movement of the vehicles on the road system have to go into a separated fund that has to go into the highway, into roads. You can, and a little bit of right of way kind of on the sides, like maybe you can do some sidewalk and bike lane type stuff, but it's tough. The bigger problem is that our state will expend virtually all of our one-time state and federal funding for charging for light duty and medium duty, our heavy duty incentive, heavy and medium duty incentive programs, and what we're using to boost our light duty programs, Oregon Clean Vehicle Rebate Program, by 2028. So some point really close to this next long session, we will basically have expended all the nice federal funds we worked really hard to claw back in lawsuits. and we're going to be being caught really flat-footed, which is a completely different issue than the road usage charge that we've talked about. But I just wanted to put that flag down in this space too, because I'm sure you all care a lot about the adoption, and the incentive programs are probably the most advantageous, have probably the largest direct impact, and especially given DEQ's move to try to put those into more income qualified programs, trying to open up more of these programs to high quality used vehicles. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for states to draw those in, and those are inherently going to be huge cost savers. Even if a vehicle is older and maybe has a sub 100-mile range, that probably works for a vast majority of people, and would dramatically cut their transportation costs. So, I just
Hey,
wanted to
Brett,
emphasize that point. Yeah, I'll stop.
yeah, you're gonna have to jump in there. I'm getting the message from behind from Kurt here that we promised to be out of this room we're in at 8 o'clock, and it's 8:05. And while I think this discussion could go on a long time, and I'm sure there are other questions, I think we're gonna have to wind it up here.
Really quick, Brett, could you put your email address in the chat here for everyone? And Brian, if you could put the Rep Gamba email, that would be great. And people could email the two of you.
That's fine, and I'm happy to come back at some point too.
Thank you.
If you all want to discuss this more and then have me back, I'd be happy to do that.
And I can get for those in the room who may have trouble getting it out of the chat, I can get it for you.
And I want to thank the presenters tonight for these great presentations and wonderful proposals. You can see as you listen tonight that Oregon has bound itself into a very tight system for both for general operations and for managing the highways. It has been an enormously difficult process, and I really appreciate the clear and wonderful thoughts that we got from Representative Gamba. His thinking, I'm still processing it, but I like the fact that he's thinking hard about how to do some of the things that we have to get done in the transportation area, as well as a very clear explanation of the general problems the state has in terms of funding schools, healthcare, and a variety of other issues as well.
Yep.
And I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and I wish you a good evening and a safe drive home.
All right.
Thanks, Bill.
Lovely.
Thank
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.